we're going to have to come to a much more sophisticated conversation about this because simply pulling out works, like images of Darth Vader so that if anyone goes to Dali and says, give me a painting of Darth Vader skiing down the Matterhorn, you can't use Darth Vader anymore, right? So there's a fair use component of that could be a funny image that illustrates a point for a meme on Twitter versus I'm going to go sell this image now.
Welcome to Cocoy AI, empowering the next generation of leaders through career advice, creativity, growth mindset, and unlocking the power of AI in order to find and do what makes you happiest in life. Hey everyone, I am here with a special guest today, Nathan Shedroff. He is a professor at CCA and was the founder of the Design MBA programs and Design Strategy. He's a serial entrepreneur and author, and his latest book, A Whole New Strategy, Everything You Need to Think and Act More Strategically, is sure to help anyone who reads it in better ways to think and act strategically. Nathan has an amazing collection of all things Concorde, which is hilarious. Can you tell me a little bit about your collection, and have you been on a Concorde?
Yeah, well, so thank you, Tiffany, for having me on. This is a total honor and a pleasure. Our first conversation was awesome to begin with. Yes, I did fly the Concorde. I got a chance to fly the Concorde the very last summer before they ended. They ended flights after the disaster in France, and then they came back just for like half a year or three quarters of a year, and then kaput forever. So I did get a chance to fly it that last time, and I've always been, I grew up being sort of a space and aerospace nut and car guy. And so, the Concorde for me is, and for a lot of people, is more than just a plane. It sort of represents what humans can achieve and technology and whatnot. And so after I got off the Concorde, I was a little pissed off because they often have little gifts they give you, like little souvenirs other than like I took the menu and I took the stuff in the seat pocket. So the magazine, the menu, and I don't think I took the air sickness bag, but they didn't give us any gifts, and then maybe they just didn't do it that last summer. So I was a little pissed off. I wanted a souvenir. And so I went on eBay like many people do, and I bought a little luggage tag from the Concorde. And little did I know that was the, you know, first drug of what became a little bit of an addiction. And so I spent about 2 years on eBay buying up a whole bunch of things, mostly British Airways interior, like service stuff. So I have service for 13, and I mean like complete service down to the correct placemats and napkins and salt and pepper shakers and all that kind of stuff and service items and da 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 da. Da. It's all online. But it was a lot of fun, and it was very meaningful to me, and I had a Concord dinner, I had a travel story dinner, and that was a lot of fun. We ate off the Concord plates and things like.
That's that's hilarious. That I mean, a lot of people collect things, but you've documented and put them online. I'll link to it in the in
Yeah.
the description below. So you've done photo shoots of your collection, and that's awesome. I think you being a car guy is something that resonates with me. Back into my early days, I used to be the art director of Car Crazy. It's a TV show that used to be on the Speed channel. And so we used to interview people all over the world about that obsession. And I if you're as obsessed with your Concord stuff as the car guys in the stories, then you have some exciting stories to tell, probably.
Well, I have to say, I've always been a car guy growing up. My undergrad degree is in car design, but I was never the hyped up car designer that a lot of my peers were. And one of the things that I focused on that nobody else in my program did was the interior. Like I really think of the interior as, first of all, the place you spend all your time with the car for, or the majority of your time. And I think that's what really started me on my path towards interface design was that these interiors were so badly designed. And I have a paper somewhere that I wrote on engine compartment ergonomics, which my ergonomics instructor said was not an appropriate topic. but he let me do it anyway. And then when I came back, he's like, "Oh, wow, there's a lot here that we should be paying attention to." I'm like, "Yeah." So that was sort of the start. I never went into the car industry professionally, but that was sort of the start of my interface interaction design, path.
That is so interesting because I talk about the interior of cars. My husband has often had American trucks, and like the mirror that is in the fold down window is over here. How are you even supposed to, like, what is that for? Am I looking behind me? It's there's alignment issues. There's things that from a user experience point of view can be greatly improved. And I feel like those are afterthought in in some of the automotive world. I'd say European automotive interiors tend to think about those little details a little bit more. Can you moving into
Yeah.
a little bit of your sorry, I could talk to you about cars all day,
I
but
I'm here for it.
can you describe your vision and mission of a whole new strategy and how it aligns with your personal values?
Yeah, I think that this has been a path that I've been on for quite a while. I went and got an MBA. I think I graduated in 2008. And so I've had my own companies, I've co-founded companies with other people. So as a designer, I have certainly intersected the core business parts of companies for a long time, done lots of consultings for large companies, small companies, NGOs, etc. And then after getting my own MBA, and it was a non-typical MBA, I don't think I would have ever gotten a traditional MBA, but it confirmed a lot of what my suspicions were, especially coming at this from a designerly perspective, which is, man, a lot of what I'm getting from the business plans and from the business people and the conversations with marketing and strategy or finance, like it doesn't make sense. Like how did you make these decisions and why do you think this is the right path? And so going to business school and seeing a bit of what traditional business people get taught in terms of strategy, but everything else as well, accounting and operations, et cetera, it became very clear why there are these deficiencies that we as designers or sometimes engineers or product managers see in the decision making and therefore the output, the outcomes of what it is that they're working on and delivered to customers. On the tail end of finishing my MBA, I started an MBA program at CCA, and it was unabashedly not your typical MBA program. We integrated design thinking and sustainability and social impacts and some other things all in integrated into the curriculum at once. And that was really the start of the solidification of figuring out a new model for strategy. And if designers are anything, we're model makers, right? Like we make models to make sense of all the pieces that we have to touch and where information comes from. So this book is the result of my 10 years at the DMBA, my 2 years at my MBA, and then, of course, my professional experience throughout all of that. And I hope that it is, I think that it is a new model to make strategy more clear. There's still a lot to do in strategy if you want to do a good job, but their current sort of traditional strategy as it's taught in business programs, as it's practiced in many, many companies, maybe not quite all, is so sloppy and so deficient in many ways that it's not a surprise that companies have trouble with the products and services they put into the market, that it's not a surprise that 80 to 90% of startups fail, not because they didn't have good coding, but because whatever they created, nobody wanted, maybe but themselves. So my quest is to fix strategy, for everyone and to make it clear how to do it better and how to do it better yourself so you can do it faster and cheaper, but still do it better than hiring or turning to the traditional tools that everyone's been taught about how to do strategy.
I I appreciate that. I think the design strategy or thinking about helping designers become even better problem solvers. I see designers as big problem solvers. And so giving designers the tools to understand how business strategy works is also a gaping hole. Like it's
Yeah.
this bridge connecting them together. And so that's one of the things that stuck out to me with reading a lot of the book that you wrote. One of them was an interview from, I think is her name is Jeannie. She
Gene
was talking
Litka. Yeah.
Litka, growth at all costs, bringing in those
Yeah.
sustainability in the successful business strategy is super important, like with the changing environment. What do you think about sustainability within design strategy or business strategy in general?
Well, let me back up 1 second. You are absolutely right that designers are usually great at strategy because we're model makers. We have to integrate conflicting requirements. There's technical requirements and sometimes gravity is like the physical world is a requirement, and then of course behavior and changing people's behavior or getting them to change their behavior. All these requirements, we're really good at integrating that and leading a process often through ambiguity that other people can't put their hands around and can't see a way through. So designers should feel really comfortable to set themselves on a trajectory to become a strategist, not just a
Mhm.
design strategist or designer doing strategy, but being a full-on business strategist. It's core to most of the skills that we have. So back to the question you had is, one of the sloppy deficiencies of strategy is it doesn't take a very complete, this is traditional strategy, doesn't take a very complete view of what's really going on out in the world. It's very narrow around a few things about your market, your competitors, your position. Most traditional strategy is like me, us, we. Where's the rest of the world? Where is your customer? Where are your other kinds of stakeholders. And one of the most important stakeholders has been always the planet. And we've ignored it for so long. Traditional strategy, traditional business programs, they just ignore this stuff. I'll give you a quick example. I taught at Stanford for 2 years, so I feel like I have a little credibility in critiquing. I did not teach in the business program at Stanford, but at the business program, you can have, and this is true of many traditional business schools, you can take a elective in sustainable supply chain, which begs the question immediately, what are you teaching in the non-elective operations class? Unsustainable supply chain? And the answer is yes. Most of these programs are legacy programs. It's very hard to change curriculum. It takes a long time, even when there's will. They're still teaching these deficient forms of business that don't look at the environment, that don't look at society and social impact. That they're trying, but they're all band-aids. So the process that I put forth in the book is nature is a stakeholder. It's there, and you shouldn't be able to ignore it, or you shouldn't be able to forget it. Of course, you can ignore anything, in any model, but I'm trying to make sure that there's a place in the process where people naturally ask the questions about society as well as technology, as well as nature, etc. And they can ignore those pieces if they want, but at least they're reminded that these things are part of the superset of what you need to look at.
Yeah, I often feel like, at least in product, everything goes super narrow focused right away without understanding the holistic picture
Yep. Yep.
of things. And to your point, it's not that unsustainability is taught, it's just completely ignored
Yeah.
entirely, which is maybe even worse. At least if they acknowledge that this class is not about sustainability, at least they're acknowledging that sustainability is an issue.
Well,
I think, yeah, okay, go ahead.
Well, yeah, sorry. I think you're absolutely right. It is worse. And this is one of the problems I have with traditional business approaches and strategy is here are these tools that people are taught to use really poorly, really sloppily. And so they use these tools not realizing that there are deficiencies. And now they have this answer that comes out of a SWOT analysis or the strategic choice cascade or, a positioning statement, the kind of common things. They have this answer, and because they've used the tool and they have an answer, now they're super confident that it's the right answer. And the problem is they don't realize how deficiently they've used these tools because no one taught them what was wrong with them. So they are, in fact, like you say, in a worse position because they have the wrong path and they're confident that they're on the right path, as opposed to not having used these tools and wondering if they were on the right path and knowing that they didn't do certain things or they didn't look at things along the way. That overconfidence really, powers them down the wrong path very quickly. It would be better not to have done any of it and be still in a questioning mind, as opposed to be lightning focused on the wrong thing and very confident that it's in fact correct.
It's making me think about this, and maybe it's a generalization, and so I should probably preface it with that, is that many people are uncomfortable being in the abstract. And
Yep.
I think that designers are trained very early on to be incredibly comfortable with something that is huge and largely abstract, and to find those pieces and putting them together into a way that is cohesive for other people to understand. But I don't know, maybe I'm making an excuse.
No,
I'm
I think
part right now, but I feel like it's easier for people to understand in these bite-sized chunks instead of going incredibly abstract.
well, you're
But it
absolutely right. And designers have processes, the whole design thinking process excels when, you're in an ambiguous situation. If the ambiguity wasn't a big problem, then maybe one of the other problem solving, mechanisms like scientific method or abductive thinking, or, there's a couple other ways that you can solve problems would be more appropriate, like integrative thinking. But when you're dealing with a bunch of ambiguous information, or you're not sure about the veracity of the information that you have, that's when design thinking works really well. And, I used to teach with Sarah Beckman at Haas at the business school at UC Berkeley, and she would see this. I saw this for 2 years, but she would see it every class where you get to a point in the process, usually just after, really good customer research, where you end up reframing the problem. And in fact, this is a really good thing to note. Sarah Beckman always says, the important thing isn't solving, it's problem finding. It's discovering the real problem that exists or the real challenge, and you can't solve the problem until you really know that. So all the teams that would go in with an answer, this is our solution from day one and we're going to work on it, never really did the reframe. I guess that's called pivoting nowadays. And so they were sort of on the wrong path, but they powered ahead because it was their first decision, and they don't want to let go of that decision because of the certainty of, nope, we're making this. And so we would see, and she sees it every semester, there's this point where sort of everything falls apart because all the data is saying, no, 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 that's not a good solution. But hey, there's a better solution here. And for the people who can't handle ambiguity very well or very gracefully, they can't let go of that certainty to jump to what is essentially more certainty, but they don't see it that way. They see it as uncertainty. And in doing so, it basically dooms their approach, right? And we see this in startups all the time. All the data says people don't want to buy this. The five of you want to, but there really aren't many more. But there's a better thing out there that if you just switched your attention and your efforts, it's an even better solution. That's a really difficult thing for a lot of people to do.
that begs the question of, how do you convince someone that is so convinced already of their own ideas that this is a better path, and to not only allow for that to be implemented, but also enough time to see it succeed.
Yeah. I don't know if I have a good answer to that. I tell my students, it is the hardest conversation you will ever have throughout your career over and over with clients or with your own leadership, where you have to go back to them and say, I know you hired me to make this, an app, a website, a device, whatever. But after we've talked to all the potential customers, we now know that this isn't what people need or want. It's not going to work. But along the way, we found this better thing. We think we should pivot to that. And many people will say, many people in leadership or clients will say, no, no, no. What do you mean to tell me that you're not going to do what you signed a contract and agreed to do? Now you want to do something else. That's not okay because they can't deal with that uncertainty. That is a really difficult, like the discussion around reframing is probably the most difficult thing. I think that the skills needed to handle that discussion are all in the, leadership, communication, collaboration skills, which most designers coming from classic design programs don't get a lot of that. Maybe at the grad level they do, but certainly not at the undergrad level. And yet those skills of how to create a new vision of a better future, this is what leadership is, that you can convince your client or leadership to go towards, that's everything. And those are communication and leadership skills. They're not the classic design skills, and yet we use those every day. And so designers really need to, you know, fortify those skills for themselves.
Is that a focus in the strategic or design strategy MBA? Like,
Oh,
I feel like I would take that class.
yeah, in fact, both in the MBA program at CCA, which I don't teach in anymore, but the MDes program, which is the graduate interaction design program where I do teach. Yeah, there's two whole classes. One in generative communications, and there's a whole class of sort of communication techniques that when I learned them at Presidio when I got my MBA, I was blown away. I was like, wow, this is, you know, these are equivalent technologies and approaches in communication that I'm used to in design or engineering. It's not just all sort of fluffy feeling, vagueness. It's a step-by-step approach to learning better communication and collaboration. So, there's a communication class and a leadership class in both of those programs because they're so critical if you wanna be a leader, if you wanna influence the people around you, up above you and below you, etcetera.
Well, for the audience that is maybe not in the Bay Area or that wants to brush up on their
Mhm.
communication skills, what are good ways that they can do this power of persuasion or
Yeah.
effective communication?
Yeah, effective, yeah, so look for effective communication or the term generative communication. There is not a lot of good writing on this, unfortunately. There is a book called Conversations for Action. Believe it's by Fernanda Flores. All of this comes from how do I say it? A philosophy of teaching of communication that came out of neuro linguistic programming. And then it sort of blossomed as everyone who encountered it sort of did their own take on it. It's blossomed into, you'll hear conversations for action, you'll hear generative communication. Sometimes there's other terms. They're all variations of the same thing, which is if you get precise about the language you use with your peers, communication clarifies and like everything gets better because you've gotten the ambiguity and the uncertainty out of your communications, especially where it comes down to responsibilities. So I can't tell you a specific book. In fact, I'm actually working on my next book will be called Concise Communication, which is my clarification of all this because I can't find the book that I want to give to my students. So, sometime this year, hopefully that'll get out. But there is material out there. I got it when I took my MBA program at Presidio from one of the sources, Bob Dunham. You could take a workshop by Bob Dunham at I think he's at the Generative Leadership Institute or something. But recognize that there is a way to be precise about language. And when you are, most of the mistakes and misunderstandings that happen in teams around collaboration sort of start to drop away. I'll give you one quick example. Like, if you're ever in a team meeting or a group meeting and someone says, well, someone should really look into that. That's a red flag. That's a trigger that says, wait, wait, wait. The word someone was used. Someone is no one. Like, is someone looking into that? No, because no one has said, I will look into that, right? So the next meeting, didn't someone look into this? No, of course not, because no one was responsible for it. So it's that kind of precision of language that if you can kind of correct a few things, Team management gets a lot easier, less mistakes are made, less things are dropped, all that kind of stuff.
It's usually, "I'll look into that," or "You specific person will look into that." I
Yeah.
wanted to move into kind of more of the career advice and leadership aspects. I know you left a note about why STEM isn't the right decision. Like why is that not the right direction? As a mother of two, I think about this pretty frequently.
Well, I don't think that STEM is bad in and of itself, but I think that as you look at what's happening with technology, and if you wanna list all the skills that you need to be successful in the world, learning now called AI, but even before that, machine automation, like programming, is getting rid of a lot of the pieces of STEM. So computers are way better at math than humans, right? Well, math is the M in STEM. It's a great deal of all three of the other, in science, technology, and engineering. So a lot of those skills that are taught in STEM are just going to go away. They're going to be done by computers. Now, there's always a necessary, amount of math that everyone should know. There's always a certain understanding about science and technology and programming that would be helpful for everyone to know. But by and large, a great deal of the skills that you get in a STEM program or degree are just going to be automated away. So if you think about that and then go back to that list of what are all the capabilities you need to be successful in life and in your career, you have to take out the stuff that computers are better than other people are, than people are, right? So what are you left with? You're left with what I call the four S's and the four C's: critical thinking and creative thinking. Computers are not great at those things. There's no real evidence that they're going to be incredible at those things. Maybe they can chip away at a little bit of it. Communication and collaboration skills. Those are things that computers, we haven't figured out how to even codify what those are, let alone try to automate them with technology. So critical thinking, creative thinking, communication skills, and collaboration skills. And then the S's are strategic thinking, systems thinking, sustainability or ecological impacts, and social impacts. Those are the things that computers aren't good at. So I'm not saying don't go into a STEM field, but don't go into the typical STEM. The traditional STEM field sort of abhors those other 8 things, right? Like, no, we're gonna hyper focus on technology and programming and math, and those are the skills that are gonna be automated. So if you future STEM programs need to have those other 8 skills as part of them, because that's what's gonna enable humans to be successful in collaboration with these automated technologies. Because if they don't have those things, they can't compete one on one with the automated technologies. And then they don't have that extra, which is going to be the difference between finding a job or loving your job and not, if you have them.
So one of the things that I had a conversation in one of my last podcasts about is the guardrails that needs to be in place for
Yeah.
some of the technologies. Do you feel that we're at the point to not have people go into that math to like I feel like who's going to check the work of the AI? I do you feel like we've developed enough trust in order to leave the M to the
Yeah.
computer?
Well,
Or
I think, a simple answer is yes, but I'll qualify that by saying it really depends on the application and like the domain you're talking about. Accounting, bookkeeping, all that's already going away. It's being automated. And that's essentially fairly simple math, right? Tax prep should be fairly simple math, right? So there's always going to be, even in those fields, a layer of jobs that is strategic accounting and forensic accounting, like auditing. So there's going to be some jobs there, but the vast majority of the work that's done there, the jobs to do that, is simple math. So yeah, that's all going away. Now, as you move to more and more critical functions like decision making, yeah, I don't think that decision making is mathematical to begin with. So no, let's not automate that. And then as you move to things like military applications, no, 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 no. the decision to fire anything should not be automated. So there's a spectrum here. But one thing that we aren't talking about in this country, or maybe even in the world, is that, math has been a big part of many white collar jobs. And we've been talking in the last, 5 years about the blue collar jobs, like the truckers losing their jobs. It's really the higher paying white collar jobs that are going to evaporate over in the next 5 to 10 years. And we're not ready for that. And, we talk about job retraining and skilling up of these jobs of people who get unemployed and maybe their jobs don't exist anymore. Those 8 skill sets that I mentioned, the 4 S's and the 4 C's, are the ways to reskill to have, a better potential to have a job later on. But the numbers are probably just not going to be there because we're going to hollow out a huge number of jobs. So then we have to talk as a society about entirely different strategies.
I think AI affects
Yeah.
every single function and workplace. I think there'll be very, very few jobs that are not impacted by AI.
Yep.
What do we do to skill up on the things that will be necessary for the future?
Yeah, that's the question of the moment, right? I think some of the answers to that might be we need to reset curricula immediately. We need to start setting kids, but not just little children and high school students, but college students and even exec ed. We need to set them on this better path, right? With these more competitive skills. And I will freely admit that a lot of those skills like communication and collaboration, like some people are just not gonna be good at those skills in the same way that not everyone can be an engineer, not everyone should be a designer, not everyone should be a doctor, etcetera, right? So, we have to put over here another question that we have to come back to, which is, what do we do with those people who just aren't gonna be well skilled in those areas? And we have to figure that out. I think we need to be, as a society, really looking at an economy and an economic model that includes some sort of, what we would call welfare in this country, but whether it's negative income tax or, some mechanism that people can have a livelihood and pay for, their food and shelter and, their Netflix bill without having a job at all or without having the kind of job that we've attached salaries to before. Maybe it's a ton of volunteer work. Maybe it's a ton of, you know, what we would call unpaid work today, like a lot of childcare, a lot of cleaning up the city streets, etc. We may have to move to a model where people get paid for that because there aren't jobs for them to go get hired by a company.
Sounds similar to maybe something that I remember from Andrew Yang of the universal income. Is
Yep.
that kind of what you're talking about?
Yes, I think that's something we definitely need to be exploring, if only for experimentation's sake, more than we are now. Because the numbers that I sort of see projected going forward are not looking good for jobs, period. And then, therefore, for institutions, right? Schools, colleges, and universities right now are looking at not just a demographic cliff of, there are fewer young people being born and graduating right now. That's like there's too many colleges and universities with too much capacity to service them, right? So something's going to give there. Our tax base is changing. Like our in the US at least, but many other countries, our population is aging and that resets, tax revenue versus expenses at the governmental level. Like all of this is happening and we're not having these conversations, I think. Certainly not enough.
You mentioned making the colleges switch immediately. Do you feel that the colleges as they are today will be able to pivot as quickly as is needed?
No, I mean, like most traditional business schools, for instance, just to look at business programs, they don't even see a big problem here. And every 10 years or so, something happens like, tremendous fraud, like the Bernie Madoff thing that happened, or, there's always some company like Enron or Global Crossings where the response is, oh, we need to have ethics classes in business school, which is like the wrong band aid approach because if ethics isn't in every class, you can't just sort of set it aside and make it really easy to ignore. I've had colleagues and students at Stanford complain that, they're in Stanford Business School, they're at GSB, and they'll go take a class in design thinking at the D School, which is not a degree granting institution. It's sort of a center of excellence of design. And then they go back to their, business class to have their business instructor say, yeah, forget all that bullshit you learned over there. Nothing, none of that's true, right? So most business programs, and for that matter, most curricula in many topics, they don't even see these problems coming. They're so busy with their day-to-day issues. And we can all admit, like, colleges and universities have sort of become a battleground for everything but education, that they're either not they're not aware of this shift and that the need to change their curriculum is so great, or even if they are, the processes for changing curriculum are so onerous, partly because of the certification. So when I started the DMBA program with my colleagues, one of the things we looked into was AACSB accreditation, which is the global accreditation body for business schools. And what we found was that we couldn't teach our curriculum for the DMBA program and be accredited by AACSB because they stipulated what needs to be taught. And we were teaching things that weren't there, and we weren't teaching things that were on their list. So we couldn't have been certified, and business programs find this out, that they will lose certification if they do certain kinds or too much change of their curriculum, and nobody wants to be decertified by the global body for business schools, right? So there are a lot of impediments to changing the curricula, and not least of which is you have a bunch of faculty that have been teaching the same thing they've been teaching for 20 or 30 years, and they don't want to change because they're human and they're tired. And what do you mean I have to rethink everything? I So there's a lot going on in this, and none of it is helping us react quickly.
Do you think it has to do with the value or the outcome that they're looking for in the end? I think about design as wanting to solve human related
Mhm.
needs and solving that kind of problems, whereas sometimes it feels like in a business school, it's all about the end dollar
Money.
and money. And it's there's something that's happening right now with the Walt Disney Company where they're doing their annual voting, and there's like two very strong opponents to the existing structure, but none of the plans have anything to do with the people or products that Disney produces. Like, it's not about making a better customer experience or making the guest experience better. It's all about the bottom line.
Yeah.
That how w why is it so disconnected? And how is that not seen as, like, a causality? Like, if you had a
Yeah.
better customer experience, maybe the stock wouldn't be doing what it's doing.
Yeah, ding, 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 ding. You just put your finger on exactly one of the biggest problems, which is we've had 70 or 80 or more years of really bad business philosophy that has trained a lot of people into thinking a lot of things that just aren't true. So, one of the most famous is a saying called the business of business is business, which is to say, don't think about sustainability, don't worry about society, don't worry about, impacts with your neighbors. That's not the role of business. The role of business is specifically and solely about making money. If you want to take your salary or your profits or your dividend and go put it towards fixing the planet or making better energy systems or helping underserved people, that's your personal business. That's not what business is. And that is a core cancer at the heart of business that we've been teaching for 75 years or more, and it's A, not true, and B, it's leading us down the wrong path, right? And there are a few of these, right? So you get this in economics, right? At the core of neoclassical economics is the statement and the belief that people are rational actors. Well, you're in design. You've done lots of design research. Have you ever met a purely rational person? No, right? So then economics and then for the rest of business is all built on what is essentially a fantasy foundation. So that's got to change. And it's really hard to make that change after not just the legacy and the entrenchment of 70, 80 more years of this thinking, but we have legislation that backs this up. Corporations are people. No, they aren't. Was never ruled as such by the Supreme Court. If you want to go back to, the 1800s and Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Radio Railroad, and then San Mateo County versus Southern Pacific Radio Railroad. Those are the two Supreme Court cases that supposedly proved that corporations were people, but that's not what happened there, and we don't have to go into that. But the legislation now is against progress. And then you have things like, if you create a corporation, especially if it's a C corp, you can be liable to your shareholders if you do things that reduce their profit. So every year, if you watch the Apple shareholders meeting, some shareholder stands up and complains to Tim Cook, "Why are you spending money subsidizing this? Why are you spending money to buy, renewable energy and to make Apple products zero, impact, et cetera, zero energy, zero waste? Why are you doing all these things? Because that's costing the company money, it's reducing profit, and that's hurting me as a shareholder." And I have seen where he has gotten visibly upset. And, Tim Cook is not someone that gets visibly upset in public ever, but he will almost angrily say to that shareholder, "This is what we do. We do this for the good of the company. We will always spend money in ways that are potentially lowering profits because they're good for the company. If you don't like it, sell your stock and get out of it." But there is a fiduciary duty, and companies get sued all the time for doing exactly these things. And that's one of the reasons why Suze McCormick here in California led a process, she's a lawyer, to create something called for benefit corporations. So we have a new corporate form. We also call them B Corps here in California and lots of other states, because the typical C Corps and LLCs have this legal peculiarity that if you even try to do the right thing, you're liable to shareholder lawsuits. So a B Corp basically says, we're still a for profit company, but we reserve the right to do good things for, other stakeholders, and you can't come after us for that. And that's a legal protection that didn't exist until about 10 or 15 years ago. And it's harder to get investment from, typical VC, et cetera, as a B Corp rather than a C Corp. So, there's decades of problems and threads that have created this really naughty problem to fix these things that have been, growing and festering for a very long.
Yeah. I'm thinking about implications, and I don't have any good answers for any of this. Like you said, it's a huge uphill battle. Do you think that AI will have any impact on how maybe even things like B Corp is today? What is the next corp? D Corp?
Yeah,
I don't
C Corp. Well, we have C Corp, A
We have
Corp,
B
maybe.
Corp.
Yeah, yeah,
We
exactly.
we have
Th
like
I mean, that's a good question. Certainly not first generation, probably not second generation. I don't know what third gen AI is gonna be like. I think this is truly a problem of priorities. It's a human problem. It's the decisions we make and the things that we care about. We have never cared about those things in the business sector before, not in a fundamental or a structural way, and we're beginning to. So, for one little example, one interesting thing that Google did when they went public is they put all this stuff into their corporate documents before they went public. So they basically sent a warning out to stakeholders that said, or shareholders, we're always going to subsidize lunch and buy renewable energy and invest in these kinds of things. That's who we are. If you don't like it, don't buy our stock. So they put that warning in, and that clears them of all that liability for the most part. But Apple, when they incorporated in the '70s, it's too late, right? Like, didn't have that language there to begin with. So it's much harder for legacy companies and older companies to do it. I would say if you're starting a company now, or you're at the point where you're going to go public, that's the moment to put in this language that effectively allows your values to be present. It's sort of like, well, in the DMBA program, we used to teach that there's fundamentally very little difference between being a nonprofit and being a for profit. And in fact, many nonprofits pay really well. Like, it's not just charities. For a long time, it was the NFL, it was PG&E, it's AARP. They all get fabulous salaries, right, as a nonprofit. The only real difference is that as a nonprofit, you can't go get the same kind of investments. You can't go to VC and angels, but you can go to foundations for grants and stuff. So there's a funding mechanism, but it's not the same. And you won't pay taxes. So you get to keep 30% of your proceeds. That's pretty amazing. As a for profit, you get the better investment alternative, opportunities. But the assumption is, as a for profit, you only care about money. And that's not a valid assumption. Every for profit should have a social agenda. It should have real values. And I'm not just talking about, your values statement, because nobody's value statement is hurt the world, destroy democracy, ruin little girls, and make everyone feel bad about themselves, but Instagram, like, but Facebook, like, so usually the value statements aren't enactable, and they're not realistic, and they're vague and whatnot. But there should be no difference between having a social agenda, having a purpose that's oriented to the world, and whether you make money or not. Every company should be well run regardless. And NGOs are notoriously poorly run in terms of management. But in general, the only difference should be taxes and investment. That's it. They should operate almost identically. Every company should have a social agenda. Every company should be well run. Every company should be thinking about, and coming back to strategy, all of their stakeholder ecosystems, not just their shareholders. They should care about and investigate their customers on a qualitative level, not just a quantitative level. It shouldn't matter if you're trying to do good, versus do well. They should be the same thing. But culturally, that's not where we've been for the last 100 years. And it's going to take a while to get to a place where people understand that. So if you want an MBA, go to a MBA program that understands those things, that values those things. And you don't have to go to an MBA program. Go get the books that talk about these things, not in the traditional framing, because the traditional framing is bankrupt, and it always sort of has been.
Yeah, yeah. I'm I'm going back to kind of the ethics conversation that we
Yeah.
were talking about before. What are your thoughts on using AI in forms of artistic expression? Like, there is some real strong ethical challenges there.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for you. I think we're all discovering this. I think that there are probably different like, different people are gonna have a different line. If you're an illustrator whose style is unique and has already been aped AI, like, you're gonna have a different line than if you're a person whose hobby is to, I don't know, make T-shirts, and it's not your core business, and you're not sort of generating your old artwork, you're going to AI to do stuff. You're gonna have a different line, right? If you're a fine artist, if you're a company, those lines are going to be different. But there is a line where someone or some group of people will say, yeah, that's still okay. Yeah, it's not a big deal. Oh, wait a minute. That's over the line. That's too much. So I think we have to have a conversation about what all those lines are, and for all these different constituents. Because if you're an artist that makes your money, your line's gonna be a lot lower and closer than if it's not your bag, or not your income, or, you see this as extra fun stuff, as opposed to, the way you make money. Your line's gonna be in a completely different place. I think that there is a huge difference though, and we already have the legal framework for dealing with IP, which is if you make money from someone else's creative work, you have to compensate. So it's probably okay that, people will make a piece of artwork, even if it's via AI, even if it's really close to known work. Like I can't think of a specific illustrator off the top of my head, but make a painting about California in the 23rd century in the style of Picasso. Picasso doesn't live, he's not alive anymore, but whatever. And I'm going to put it on my wall or I'm going to make a t-shirt of it. That's a very different use case than I'm going to go sell artworks and t-shirts and postcards and stuff with that artwork. And the law already has that line that says there's fair use and then there's, IP that you need to compensate people for. I think this is going to become much more important, but there's a gray zone, which is what happens if you use it in the illustration of an article? It's not core to the article. It's sort of a nice thing. That's a commercial use, but it's not the same thing as selling mugs with that illustration on it. It's the it's the gray zone there that we're going to really argue over. But I think that the we're going to have to come to a much more sophisticated conversation about this because simply pulling out works, like images of Darth Vader so that if anyone goes to Dali and says, give me a painting of Darth Vader skiing down the Matterhorn, you can't use Darth Vader anymore, right? So there's a fair use component of that could be a funny image that illustrates a point for a meme on Twitter versus I'm going to go sell this image now
Right.
and I've trounced other people's IP, mainly now Disney. That's going to be an interesting conversation. I'm not sure how to have that conversation, but my guess is it's going to include a lot of lawyers and IP experts.
Well, I mean, it makes me think about it's a comparison between Napster and
Yeah.
all of the image AI things of it changed the music industry completely, right? Until iTunes came out and had some sort of
Yep.
legal way to
Yeah.
download the music. It's
And there's still the issue of using a backbeat or using a snippet of someone else's song in your song. Like, that's not a distribution problem. That's a creative problem. And we've seen those lawsuits and they sort of have been all over the place. Some people consider that, the ruling to be the wrong ruling, and some people consider it to be the right ruling. And we're never really going to agree about all of it, but we need to come to some sort of legal framework for dealing with all that.
Yeah, I think you see it. I think you see it in the social media when people use snippets of music. It's it's it has pluses and minuses, right? Some unknown artist gets something that is viral. Now everybody has that song and wants to have it.
Yep.
Versus someone, well, I think Metallica very much was the poster child for bringing down Napster of like,
Yeah.
I need to be paid for my artistic work. So,
And it
like, I feel like we're in that stage, but for
yeah.
AI, and it's gonna be even messier on how people get funded for their IP.
Yeah, and it goes both ways, right? Like, Kate Bush saw a total resurgence a year or 2 ago of her song, you know, when it got used as the background for the ending scene of Strange Things. Like, that was a really good thing for her, but it's not always a really good thing for every artist. Yeah, AI is gonna make this a lot more tricky, but then you have other sort of machine solutions that have done really interesting things. So there's 2 guys, I can't remember, I think they're in the US, they're engineers. They essentially programmed computers to produce and then trademark or copyright every possible, I think it was 5-note musical snippets, right? So their idea was if we can trademark or copyright all of these things and put them all in the public domain, then we're not going to have these lawsuits about that little snippet from my song is contributing to your song and you owe me money. Like, done. So it's not even just AI, but other kinds of machine computation that is causing these issues that we have to deal with, both positive and negative. And that's why I think, just to get this back to strategy for a moment, you need a framework that surfaces all these things because the normal business tools, like, they ignore it. They don't even ask you to say, have you thought about a partnership strategy for your company that includes, the NGOs that might be friendly and the NGOs that are your foes that are gonna come after you, or the schools that you could partner with, or, all these other stakeholders. If you don't have a framework that surfaces this stuff, you never even have the opportunity to consider them.
Still have so many questions for
I
you. I feel like I can talk to you all day. What are you most excited about?
Well, so thank you for having me on, and I too feel like we just scratched the surface, and there's so much more that we could be talking about. I look forward to that, maybe even in person sometime since we're like we're in adjacent counties, I think. We're not that
Yeah.
far away. I think I'm really excited at the moment. This year is all about trying to get a wider understanding of strategy out there. I'm also starting a company around this, so I already have a free tool in beta out on the net right now that steps you through this strategic process, does all the calculations for you. Sorry, bookkeepers and accountants. So I really, really want to help people have a better strategic vision of what their best opportunities are and then how to implement them than the tools have allowed them in the past. So that's you know, my big push these days. That's what I'm focused on.
Yeah, and besides this book, what should everybody be reading? What should they be watching?
Oh, geez. Well, there's a lot of references in that book in the resources section. So those are the ones that at least are around strategy. I think it's really important to whatever you watch or read that is expanding your vision for possibilities. So if you're into sci-fi, there's, Ted Ching's short stories are incredible. But if you're into, historical fiction or whatever, you need to have things that advance your mind and advance your view of the world, as well as every now and then maybe something that advances your skills in your career too. But I'm really a big proponent that, we should be expanding our view of the world and our understanding, not spending all our time laser focusing on our jobs and, you know, the things that we have as necessities.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. I agree. Always having that ability to keep that open mind and be flexible for what's to come. Who
Yeah.
who should I interview next?
Oh, geez. Well, I have a call with my friend Maria Judice in a couple minutes because she's now wrestling around with this sort of stakeholder ecosystem process. And she has a great book with Christopher Ireland, who I interviewed in my book called Change Makers, which is really one of those expansion books of, hey, there's all these really great skills. And if you really want to make change in the world, which many people, especially young people, do, she is a great interview. And those are all like evergreen relative topics. I have to come back to you because I do think that there's some really interesting thinkers, specific technologies, and specific parts of society. You might consider if you're interested or your audience is interested in change in regenerative agriculture and food. Douglas Gayton over at thelexicon.org is a fascinating person with an incredible network and insight into how we're making change in the food systems. I could go on and on, but I'll maybe email you a couple people to interview.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I am looking forward to our next conversation. And
Please.
this has been amazing. Thank you so much for being on the show. And I think that your work is going to change lives. I think getting designers to have more business strategy or even strategy in general is super valuable.
What more could a designer ask for, right? But to help people make change in the world. So thank you very much, Tiffany. It's been a pleasure.
Thank
But like, how could that possibly ever get us to a better world, right?
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
even in reading LinkedIn, I can immediately spot the ChatGPT post. I mean, especially the really mediocre ones that have just asked not even version 4 to give them a
Yeah.
response. And that is disheartening to see, because having real conversations with people, and this is one of the reasons I'm doing this,
Yeah.
you hear a real perspective. Like, part of it is hearing from actual people. I'm in this like echo chamber of AI saying the same thing over and over.
Yep. Well, and then AI doing AI, like multiple regressions to the mean, you just get sort of pablum. We're in the process right now, this week, of finishing our reviews of applications for students for the fall. And it's very clear some of them are using AI, not just in the essays, but we have a video. We always have at least one video answer so we can gauge students' language skills. We have what we think is the first AI video
Oh, of course.
essay response that we've ever seen. And now, like, what do we do with that?
I don't know. It's either really creative, or, I mean, it's at a specific time. It depends if you have actual like verbiage of where you stand on AI from an institution or not. I know for Stanford, they somewhat encourage you to be using the tools as long as you tell them
Yep.
that you are.
Yep.
So
Exactly. Well, and so if she had done something really creative with that, which is like maybe she had a conversation with herself, but the other person was actually AI generated. Like, okay, I'm all here for that.
yeah.
But it wasn't like her sound was not synced with her lips,
Mm,
which we have to. It leads us to believe that her English skills are not very good, so she dubbed them in, and that's
that's
the
interesting.
exact reason we're doing the essay.
Well, it's interesting because there's so many technologies that are there to help you
Hmm.
communicate with people, and that's one actually I think Spotify is doing for their podcast, to be able to translate them into many different languages across the
Yeah.
world in your own voice. I
Yep.
haven't actually listened to those. I think there's certain AI generated voices that are far better than others.
And I'm all here for that too, right? As long as you declare that's
Declare
what's
it.
going
Yeah.
on.
Declare it. I mean, I think that shows that you are able to adjust and
Yep.
try new things. I don't think you get docked on trying new things. You do if you're hiding it.
It's exactly right. Yeah. I think I just think back to like the moment when I heard, oh God, who's the actor that plays House? Hugh Laurie. When I heard Hugh Laurie speak in his normal voice, which he has a British accent, after having watched years of House, which he has this absolutely perfect American accent, you sort of do this double take, like which is the real Hugh Laurie? And I think we're going to have a lot of that coming in the world in cases like you said, which is like having listened to someone's voice that was AI generated for a good purpose, for a good reason, but being used to that. It's the same thing that when you meet a radio personality, like you've heard Terry Gross for years on the radio, and then you see a picture of her and it doesn't match your expectation. I think we're in for a lot of those surprises. But like you said, it needs to be disclosed. You need to know what's going on. It's when you don't and it's been hidden that it really becomes a social issue.
Oh, well, and I should tell you, this has been all AI. No, I'm just kidding.
And I would say, good for you. Excellent.